purpose of this hearing tonight is to hear a request for a conditional use and parking variance and lot size variance at 123 and 127 Washington Street. This is case number 535. At this time, anyone who wishes to speak at this meeting, please stand for the oath. Please raise your right hand. Do you hereby solemnly declare and affirm under penalties of perjury that your responses given and statements made will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you. The codified zoning ordinance of the Mayor and City Council of Havre specifies procedures governing the operation of the Boards of Appeal of the city. Section 3 dictates administrative requirements to be met prior to the hearing. This includes advertising, posting the property, notification of applicable property owners. Have these requirements been met?
They have.
Have you received any input from the community?
We have, and we've provided some letters and a signed petition to all of you with your packets.
Okay, could you, would you read that for the people here?
You want me to read the letters?
Is there a letter or is there multiple?
There were several letters that were included, and then there was a there were, I think, 30-some signatures that were included with one of the letters.
Okay. Well, why don't you, can you give us an overview of the letters you received?
If I can just object, I believe that any testimony should be coming from witnesses that would actually be present, rather than coming from letters that were submitted without the opportunity for cross-examination.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that in mind, then we will proceed to testimony. The ordinances governing the operation of the Board of Appeals of the city is a matter of public record and available at City Hall should anyone wish to review it. The applicant tonight, again, is requesting conditional use and variances. First, we will hear from the applicant or the applicant's representatives.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to present for you tonight. My name is Brian Young. I'm the attorney for the applicant tonight. We're here tonight for a conditional use approval to convert the existing Zellman Funeral Home property at 123 and 127 South Washington Street, which is zoned RB, to a multifamily housing pursuant to Section 205-27E of the Code. This use will be more in keeping with the surrounding properties than the current use is. Also requested with the application are two variances. The first was a variance from the parking requirements of 122 for off-street parking. This request was made in an abundance of caution given the ambiguous language in the zoning code. In consultation with the zoning and city attorney, we've determined that the proposed use will comply with the parking requirements of the zoning code, and we don't believe that that variance is needed at this point based on compliance. I understand there are several residents that are here and people who may have submitted letters that are concerned about this issue, so I'm glad that the parking requirements of the code will be met by this request. The second request for a variance is for a lot size variance from Section 205, Table 1, which requires a minimum lot area of 10,000 square feet. Currently, 123 and 127 South Washington are two separate lots, and the plan would create two duplex residences which would comply with the code. With that, the city has requested that the two lots be consolidated. Without the consolidation of the lots, no variance would be needed. Because the department is requesting that the lots be consolidated, the two lots together need to comply with the multifamily housing requirement of 10,000 square feet. The requirement, the properties combined will be about 9,060 square feet. And so the variance is requested based on that. There is a hardship that will be created because of that consolidation, that otherwise there would be no need for a variance. One important factor for your consideration will be that there is a garage that very unusually was constructed partially on 123 South Washington and partially on 121 South Washington. And that garage is currently under lease by the property on a recorded lease with land records, long-term lease, and that lease is currently being negotiated for an extension. With the square footage that is leased in that garage, the use would be approximately 10,300 square feet and would therefore exceed the requirements of the code. So we are requesting that the variance be approved from Table 1 based on size because of the hardship created from the consolidation and also because there's ample additional space if the garage lease is included, which again, the garage is partially constructed on the subject property, which is definitely an unusual characteristic. If there's no questions with that opening, I would call Mr. Niceforo as the first witness.
Any questions? I guess I have a question. If you don't feel that a variance for off-street parking is required, why'd you request it? Why is that part of your application?
In our initial discussions with the department, there was questions as to how the code would be applied for this property. And the main reason for that, I believe, is because this is actually in an area designated in the city as being exempt from the on-street parking requirements. However, there have been some changes to the code with 3 different conflicting provisions, and there was a question as to that interpretation. So rather than waiting to file until we were able to discuss that with the city attorney and with the department, we filed so that we would have it before the board in the event that it was necessary. Because otherwise there would have been a delay, especially in the summer for my vacation, department's vacation, city attorney's vacation. So we put the request in so that we would all have the opportunity to have a discussion and review the code and determine what actually would be required. The staff report will indicate that there is currently there's 5 units that are proposed. One of those units is grandfathered in because it's existing now. There are then 4 units that are proposed to be constructed on the lower level. The code provides that if there are 3 or fewer units, that it's exempt. However, if there are more than 3, then there would be 2 spots that would be required per lot. So I believe it is as our position, I believe the department's as well, that the first 3 units are exempted and not that as soon as you go over that 1 lot, you'll go from having a 0 requirement to having a requirement of 8 spots. As it works out, even if the requirement is 8 spots, we believe that there's 8 spots that are on the property, and especially if you include the 2 spots that are in the garage that are under a long-term lease, there would be no question that there's 8 spots available. So we believe that the requirement is only 2 spots. Even if they were to determine that there's 8, we have the 8 spots. So the question was whether or not the 5th one would be grandfathered, and I don't believe there's a real legal question on that, and then also whether or not this would apply. So I believe we've got it fully in compliance on that at this point. The board, if there is any questions on that, more particularly from a legal matter, you can let me know, but I believe you'll hear from the department on that as well, and our argument as to why we are in compliance with the parking requirements of the code.
All right, thank you. Who else is going to speak?
Go, Mr. Niceforo. No, that'll work.
This is recorded, so you need to be absolutely. It's on. You can just speak in.
You can state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, my name is Nick Niceforo. I'm at 157 Hillside Terrace, Staten Island, New York.
What are the address for the properties?
123 and 127 South Washington Street, Havre, Maryland.
And do you know the zoning for those properties?
It's residential business.
Who is the current owner of the properties?
Currently, it's 123 South Washington, LLC.
And how are the properties currently being used?
There's a funeral home on the premises. Zellman Funeral Home operates the lower level, and there's an apartment on the above on the 2nd level.
Thank you. I'm going to ask you to identify this photograph, please.
Yes, this is the property that we're looking to purchase. This is the funeral home, and above that is the apartment.
Thank you. This would be exhibit number 1. What is your connection with the property?
But my wife and I are the contract purchasers.
What is your intention for the property?
The existing apartment will remain. I plan to convert the first floor into 4 apartments.
Can you identify this, please?
Yes, this is the blueprint that the architect has come up with to divide the current funeral home into the 4 apartments.
Is this a final plan?
No, not yet. We'd like to, we have to need to get it stamped for approval by engineers.
How are the properties currently situated?
There are 2 adjacent lots.
Can you identify this for the record?
Yes, this shows the 2 adjacent lots that we just spoke about.
Is this the boundary survey?
Yes,
Exhibit 3. Is it your understanding that the city has requested that those lots be consolidated if this use is approved?
yes.
If not for the consolidation, what would you be requesting?
2 duplexes, we wouldn't need a variance.
Can you describe the lot lines of 123 South Washington?
Yes, it's unusual. It runs from South Washington to South Strawberry, but in the middle of the lot, there's a 60-foot long indentation in the northern property boundary.
Is there anything else that's unusual about 123 South Washington?
There is a garage that was constructed partially on that property and partially on the neighboring lot. The garage is about 41.5 feet by 30.2 feet, which is approximately 1,250 square feet.
How is that garage accessed?
The only access to it is from this lot, on the east side of the garage towards South Washington Street, but behind the neighboring residence. It is a parking pad for 121 South Washington, and that is also accessible through 123 South Washington.
Does it have access any other way than through 123 South Washington?
No.
Thank you. Is there an agreement relating to the access of the garage?
Yes, 123 South Washington is leasing the garage, and 121 South Washington can cross 123 to get to the parking pad. That agreement is a recorded land lease with the Hartford County Land Records, and we spoke with the person in charge of the lease, and they're willing to extend the lease for us.
You're in negotiations for
Yes.
extending that lease now?
Yes,
Is this the lease?
yes.
Exhibit 4. So with the garage square footage included, you're over 10,000 square feet, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is the placement of the garage on 2 different lots typical?
No, that's unique to this property.
Is the easement to access the neighboring property across 123 South Washington typical?
No, that's unusual.
Is having a lease for 1,250 square feet of additional space on a neighboring lot that's accessed from your lot something that's typical?
No, that's unique also.
Can you describe 127 South Washington?
It's a rectangle on South Washington, but it only goes back a little past the building. The lot is about half as deep as 123 South Washington's lot.
Is that typical of this area?
No, it's unusual. Most of the lots in the area are the whole block, bordering 2 roads with access from Strawberry Lane or another alley.
Okay. You said you were intending to put 2 units on each lot, is that correct?
Yes, it would effectively be 2 duplexes.
You understand that the city has requested those lots be consolidated?
Yes, we would extinguish the lot line between 123 South and Washington and 127 South Washington.
So what would that resulting lot be like?
It would be unique. Not only would it have all the unusual traits of the two lots individually, but it would be created an L-shape lot with an indentation on one side.
So that would be unique as well?
Yes,
Would the consolidated lots be unusual based on the building?
yes. Right now, it's unusual to have a building over two lots. Once consolidated, it will be unusual because the building is an unusual shape since it is tiered due to the unique lot shape with the indentation and the property boundary.
Without the consolidation, would you need that area variance?
No, the duplexes would comply with the lot requirements.
And with the consolidation, you do need the variance.
Yes, the code requires 10,000 square feet for multifamily, and this would be 9,060 square feet.
Okay. And again, with the garage lease, you are 10,300 square feet approximately?
Correct, yes.
And therefore wouldn't need the variance with the lease included?
Yes.
Does the city's requirement that the lots be consolidated cause a hardship?
Yes, without the consolidation, we could operate the 4 new apartments. With it, we need a variance.
Okay. After consolidation, will the property have other practical difficulties if the variance isn't approved?
The lot will have an odd shape, and it's a strange building design. The current use, a funeral home, was approved, but it really isn't a great use for this location. The lot isn't suited for business uses. Residential is the best use. It would be difficult to do anything with this property without a variance from the 10,000 square foot requirement.
What's the neighborhood like?
It's residential business. Most of the buildings on the South Washington are residences, especially the surrounding properties, several of which are leased to tenants.
Can you identify this document? Is this a map of the neighborhood?
Yes,
And what does it show the surrounding neighborhood is zoned?
residential business.
That's the same as this property?
Correct.
This is Exhibit 5. Would this use have an adverse impact on the neighboring lots?
No.
Why is that?
It's keeping with the use of the neighborhood. It would keep things consistent.
Would granting the relief requested create a substantial injury to the public health, safety, and general welfare of the neighborhood?
No, it would not affect health, safety, or welfare, and brings the property in accord with the character of the neighborhood. The funeral home there now is out of character and generates a lot of cars, both for parking and for viewings and for quelling funeral processions. So this would improve the welfare of the neighborhood because all the traffic goes away.
Let's review that parking. How many spots can be accommodated on site?
I'd say 6 to 8.
Okay. And how many off-street parking spots does that garage allow?
2, though there is room for another car in there.
Okay. And that's under discussion with the current landlord of that, or owner of that property, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. You have one apartment that doesn't need any spots. Is that your understanding?
Yes, the existing apartment is grandfathered and doesn't require any off-street parking under the code.
Is it your understanding that the first 3 units in a building don't need off-street parking?
That's correct. This property is in a specialty designed part of the city that is generally exempt from off-street parking requirements. As you can tell from it being able to accommodate the funeral home, there are on-street options available to accommodate a lot of vehicles there.
I'm going to ask you to look at the staff report and the photograph 2 pages from the end of the report. What does this picture depict?
This is the block with the funeral home, and there's plenty of parking there. I just left there. It's a Thursday night. It's summer, and left there about a half hour ago, and there was plenty of parking there.
Okay. And can you tell from looking at this picture what time of day this picture may have been taken?
Looks like early evening, after 6. Definitely.
Even with there being available on-street parking, is it your opinion that there's ample parking on-site that you'll be able to provide?
Yes.
If the lots weren't consolidated, would you need any off-street parking?
No, each property would have 3 or fewer dwelling units, so it would be exempt from any needed off-street parking.
With the consolidation, you understand the city requires off-street parking for 1 unit?
Yes, in the staff report, they require off-street parking for 1 unit.
And to state the obvious, if there's 6 to 8 spots on site plus 2 spots for the garage, that's 8 to 10, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And that's more than enough than what's needed for 1 unit?
Yes,
And enough parking for all the units that are on site, even if there weren't some that were exempted?
yes.
Will the multifamily use comply with all the standards and all the requirements for multifamily uses in the city of Havre de Grace?
Yes.
Will the multifamily use be detrimental to the use, peaceful enjoyment, economic value, or development of surrounding properties or the general neighborhood?
No, it is a consistent use and should help the value of the surrounding properties. We aren't adding to the building square footage, so it won't be detrimental to the development of neighboring properties.
Will the multifamily use cause any objectionable noise, vibrations, fumes, odors, dust, toxicity, glare, or physical activity?
No, none of those things should come from the multifamily residential use of the property.
Will the multifamily dwelling be in harmony with the general character of the neighborhood, considering population density, design, and scale?
Well, we aren't adding to the square footage, so the building will be about the same as it always been. Any changes to the facade would be designed specifically to be in harmony with the general character of the neighborhood.
Will the multifamily use be consistent with the comprehensive plan or other planning guides or capital programs for the physical development of the district?
Yes, this is in keeping with the residential business nature of the property and fits the comprehensive plan.
Will the multifamily use adversely affect the health, safety, security, morals, or general welfare of residents, visitors, or workers in the area?
No, it will be consistent with the area and will be a benefit to the area, as all the costs from the funeral use will no longer be on the property.
Will the multifamily use be served by adequate public facilities and services, including police and fire protection, water and sanitary sewer, storm drainage, public roads, and other public improvements?
Yes, most of that won't change from the current use, and those services have all been adequate. The property's demands on those services should decrease with the new use.
Will you consider the environmental impact, the effect on sensitive features, and the opportunities for recreation and open space?
Yes, the building will remain mostly the same. Converting existing buildings is much more environmentally friendly than building a whole new building.
Will you consider the preservation of cultural and historic landmarks?
Yes, there are no cultural or historic landmarks on the properties.
Is there a need for this multifamily use?
Absolutely. Havre de Grace and Hartford County are rapidly growing communities, and rental rates are soaring. More housing is needed to accommodate the number of residents.
I'm going to review the conditions recommended by the city. Do you agree to provide off-street parking as required?
Yes.
Do you agree to obtain all applicable permits and inspections for the building renovations?
Yes.
Do you agree to pay for all applicable fees prior to the issuance of a use and occupancy permit?
We will pay for all appropriate fees.
Thank you. I have no further questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Questions?
Can I ask for a clarification? You referenced the garage a couple of times, both in counting it towards the square footage.
Click on if you're.
Yes, you've referenced the garage a couple of times, both in the accumulation of square footage for the total and also counting towards the available parking spots. Is this the lease that you currently have in force for that garage?
Yes.
Okay, because it clearly states on here that it's for commercial uses only.
Yes, so that is the lease that's currently in place. I believe, as was indicated, that lease is under negotiation. So the contract has been signed but has not been consummated pending this hearing.
Okay.
And the negotiations with the current owner of the property that's on that lease are continuing for that reason as well.
So your intent then is to not have it be for commercial use
No, it'll be
only?
residential.
Okay. Go ahead.
And how long is that lease extension that you're talking about?
The lease is a 20-year lease currently. It has a few more years left on it. There's been talks of the extension. We've not gotten to term for that. But the owner of the neighboring lot has said that he's amenable to extending that lease. We have not set exactly whether that would be another 20-year lease or if it would be a shorter period of time with renewal options or what would happen with that. But the intent would be to continue to have that garage leased. it is limited because the access is only accessible from 123 South Washington. So short of putting in an access by cutting into a block wall and putting in new garage doors, options are limited for it.
Okay.
If this is a 20-year lease, it's in force until 2027.
Yes.
Okay.
Questions?
I just have a quick one, if that's okay. Is it Niceforo? Is that how you pronounce your last name?
yes,
Yeah. You just mentioned a bunch of times that there were some irregularities with the lot and stuff. Is this the first project that you've redeveloped?
This is my first yes.
This is your first project you redeveloped? Okay, okay. I was just curious of what your background was with in development or redevelopment, that sort of thing, I was curious what your experience was of how you came to the opinion that the lots were oddly shaped or those sorts of things.
Just speaking with people that know about surveys, we had a survey done, so real estate agent and, the attorney, so.
That's fair. Thank you. Yep.
And you went to the property, correct?
Yeah, I went to the property myself, yes.
And you said you were looking at the parking that was around there
Yes.
off the street and everything. So did you look at some of the adjacent properties as well?
Yes,
And you looked at that exhibit number 5 that showed the that showed the residential business zoning for the property?
Yes.
Correct? And so were you able to compare the lot lines on this property with the lot lines of other properties? And that was part of your consideration?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Staff doesn't disagree. I was just curious what your background was. Thank you.
Tim, I have a question for you. Looking for an explanation. The Department of Planning is recommending somewhere between 2 and 10 parking spaces, 2 and 8 parking spaces.
2 and 8.
Yeah. How did you come to that, and how'd you come to that?
Sure. So in Chapter 122, this area is in a parking exempt area. It's within the parking exempt boundary, but that parking exemption says that if you have more than 3 residential units, that you don't qualify under the parking exemption. So then there's also whether there's 2 spaces or 3 spaces required. So 2 spaces are required for multifamily, 3 spaces are required for new construction. After speaking with the city attorney, we didn't consider this to be new construction. It's a renovation or redevelopment of an existing building. So 2 spaces would be allowed. As Mr. Young had mentioned, we think from a legal standpoint and also just from a practical standpoint, the apartment that exists is grandfathered in. The impact of that apartment is already being felt by the neighborhood, whatever that impact is. So then we looked at just those other 4 units. So if you require 2 spaces for those 4 units, then that would be 8 spaces. If you read the code, literally for the parking exemption, that's what it says. However, if you think of it just from a practical standpoint, part of our analysis was it's kind of weird that you could build 3 units everywhere in the parking exempt area and never have parking required, but at the 4th one, you're required to have parking for all 4 every single time. So part of that analysis was that the one apartment would be grandfathered in, and 3 units would be in the parking exempt area. So then just that last unit would require parking. So that's why we said, based on your interpretation of whether it's the strict reading of the code of what it says versus kind of what's practical and makes sense, that it should be somewhere between 2 and 8.
Okay. And any questions for Tim about that? And evaluation of the property, can they get 8 parking spaces?
Yeah, it looks like it. So we had a condition change. So I went out there and took some pictures today. So this is the lot, the 2 lots Mr. Young had mentioned. So the blue one is this kind of odd-shaped lot that has the 60-foot indentation they spoke about. And then you can see the buildings also onto the red area. So they'll have to consolidate those together. So I measured just using GIS, and we require for parallel parking 22 feet. Mm-hmm. So on the southern border between the blue line and the red line facing to the rear, it looks like you can fit in about 5 spots. And then as you can see on there, on where the indentation, and there's 2 cars parked there already, and then the garage. So we measured, and it looks like you could have fit 5 spots. So then I just took a box. This was just a rough estimate. I took a box and I just laid it over top of that white car on the north and made a box. And then I was able to show pretty easily that you can fit 6 spots there, plus the 2 in the garage once that lease is put together, which would equal the 8 spaces. So they would meet the maximum amount of our recommendation, which would mean that they wouldn't even need a variance in this matter. So what we did do, though, is that we were asking for additional conditions, but I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary. So it would be an update of the lease with some of the things that Mr. Wenner had said, and also just changing the name of the lease to the new owner from the old owner, that they would need 8 total spaces, that the parking spaces need to meet the dimensions of Chapter 122, that the design of that area needs to be approved by the Planning Department and Public Works before it's done. And we're just asking for some sort of curbing or bollards to separate the areas, these orange areas that I had drawn in. So just to separate an area from the sidewalk, so from this little walkway that you see here, if you can see it, there's just something to separate the parking from the walkway, and then the parking from this adjacent fence. And actually already in this area, there's a piece of curb that's there. So we're just asking for some sort of separation, so when people parallel park, they don't hit the neighbor's fence or they don't park on the walkway.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Young, are you aware of these additional conditions?
I am
Between you
now.
and your client?
I would have to ask to be able to consult with my client about those conditions. I was not aware of them before.
Okay.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If I may ask one question and follow up while we're on that
Sure.
topic. Is it also correct that if this were to remain 2 separate lots as duplexes, the off-street parking would not be required?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just about these conditions, they're listed as conditions, but I mean, you'd have to do this anyway. We would need a site plan. The parking lot dimensions on that site plan would have to meet the code, and then, we would inspect. I think the only thing that would be out of the ordinary would be, and I'm not even sure that it is, would be that separation, that curbing or bollards that required by public, but all these other things would be required anyway.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that was sworn in that would like to speak?
Can my client take a seat?
Oh, sure, yeah. I thought he was sitting.
And then Mr. Young, I don't know if it'd be easier maybe if you sat in Mr. Niceforo's spot, and then people could use the podium and you could ask questions from there.
Good evening. I'm Alan Kleinberg, resident at 131 South Washington Street. Just a few questions. It was difficult. This is the first time we're sort of seeing any of the parking elucidated at all for us. First question, would these be dedicated spots for the new residents?
They would need to, yeah, we'd be requesting that they would show the lines, and that those parking lines would be the size required under code. It's 22 feet in length for a parallel parking spot.
22 feet.
No, so this isn't to scale. Like I said, I put a box over that white car to the north, and then I just verified it by using GIS on a map. Mm-hmm. And I drew from the property line up as many 22 feet spots, 22-foot spots as I could. And I got to 5 spots where it was practical. So this is a really conservative, rough drawing. There's possible that more spots could be required. I can't imagine, or more spots possible. I can't imagine less spots because it's, those are oversized boxes, and it's,
This looks like the same size of the car, however.
It's close, but it's bigger than the car. I made the box larger than the car. Yeah, it was the best I could do at the time.
A parking, you need, at least 22 feet is a lot bigger than a car. So
Right.
This just looks a little bit off, that's all.
In which way?
It looks like it would be less than 22 feet. 22 feet requires space in order to parallel park.
Well, you have,
This car looks like it would fit right in the box.
right, so this way would be 22 feet, but then you have this entire driveway to come in. So all this aisleway comes in, and then you'd be able to park in those spaces.
How are you going to parallel park into those spots?
You'd pull in here, you'd pull in this drive, and then you'd back into the spot.
It just, the size looks a little odd to me, that's all.
Yeah, I mean, the requirements that we're putting as the conditions, for some reason, if it doesn't meet our code requirements,
Right.
then they wouldn't do it.
Would they be dedicated, so would they be like signed for, only for use for that apartment?
We could request that.
That would be awesome if that could be done, because then that way, that would be dedicated for them. And then the real concern for the neighborhood is, there's two different kinds of parking. There's episodic and there's chronic parking. And the episodic parking that happens now with the funeral home, there's a funeral, there's a lot of cars. We all know when to expect that. We all kind of get our spots on the street, and the funeral comes and then they go. With chronic parking, we've had instances where you have a car that parks on the street and stays there for 3 months. This is different. Residential is a chronic kind of a parking situation, so it's slightly different in terms of my way of thinking about it, and I guess some of our neighbors too. We just, as a neighborhood, wanted to make sure that there wasn't just an overload of 15 or 8 to 15 more cars on that street. We have some pictures of other different times of the day where it's, there's more volume of cars than was noted by the pictures that we saw here today. So that was really our main concern, is that, just basically the episodic versus the chronic nature of the parking, and whether there would be dedicated spots for the funeral home, for the new residents, that would be enough to take care of that. Those are our concerns.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Anything else?
No.
No? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for
No
coming.
questions.
And just to be clear about the boxes, because I don't know if this made sense. So the box was really, I just drew over a car to kind of show how much was there. But using the county's GIS system, I drew from the parking lot line all the way up to the building. And you were able, with 22-foot spots, able to get more than 6. But because you couldn't really fit in there, I just knocked it back to 5, and then I put in the graphic just as a visual of like the size of a car where it would fit. But you were able to get more than 5 spaces at 22 feet based on that GIS measurement.
And a space has to be 22 feet.
22 feet is what's required by law.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes?
If the witness hasn't been sworn, I'd ask that it be sworn.
Yeah, he didn't take the oath.
Oh,
I'm Roger Lee.
you have to take the oath before.
Fine. Want my name first?
Give it just a sec here. Do you please raise your right hand. Do you hereby solemnly declare and affirm under penalties of perjury that your responses given and statements made will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please give us your name and address.
Roger Lee, 314 Bourbon Street. I had a couple of questions and a couple of comments. The first comment is that there was a statement that there was no historical value to this property. The existing house with the third floor apartment was once a residence of R. Madison Mitchell. And I don't have to explain who R. Madison Mitchell was to anybody in Havre de Grace. The garage in the back was once his decoy carving studio. And that was moved down to the Decoy Museum, and this garage was built in its place. Okay, another thing I want to point out is I've driven by this garage many times, and I've looked at the photograph in the presentation. There are 3 large garage doors. Aren't there 3 parking places in this garage?
They're all 2-car garages.
The testimony was that this is a 3-car garage. However, 2 of those spots are under lease currently.
Okay. Okay. I'm also noting that there are 2 cars parked north of the subject property, and they appear to be cars associated with an apartment dwelling at 121 Washington. So we actually have two other vehicles that are going to have ingress and egress into this very tight parking area. I also want to point out that on the plan that was provided, the southern two-bedroom apartment appears to only have an entrance in the back. The other apartments all have either an entrance in the front or on the side. So people that rent these other apartments that have front and side ingress and egress are not going to be very inclined to park in the back, especially if the parking is difficult. So that's really my point. My point is that if I rented one of these apartments that had front and side egress, which is 4 out of the 5, I'd be looking for a place in the front on the street. I wouldn't be trying to park in this very tight area in the back. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Oh, you weren't sworn in yet? Okay, let's go. Please raise your right hand. Do you hereby solemnly declare and affirm under the penalties of perjury that your responses given and statement made will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yep.
I do. Thank you. Please state your name and address.
I'm Brian Bangs Properties. I'm actually the owner of 121 South Washington. My concerns actually are not similar to the neighbors around there. Because actually, I'm actually in favor of what is trying to be done here as far as, Fred and Tara have been great neighbors, the entire time they've been there. So I want to see them do well, with what they're doing, moving on, and then seeing the apartments there is fine. My concern, as you guys were speaking, and I think it actually even caught you a little bit off guard, was seeing, as far as the garage and all that, we'll figure those things out. As far as they were talking about extending, the lease and all that, I'm good with figuring that stuff out. But this right here that you were talking about, this little barricade thing, I'm kind of curious what more you guys are talking about with that, because
There's just a sidewalk there. I want to make sure nobody parked on the walkway.
no, and I'm fine, but in other words, for me, we take pride in our buildings around town. We work hard to make sure they look good. I have a really amazing tenant here, and there is a sidewalk here that when you come through here, to put some type of any type of a barricade or anything like that, to me aesthetically would.
It could just be a curb.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
just something. So if somebody's parking into a spot, they don't park on the walkway. They would hit the curb and have to scoot over. Mhm.
Tim, on the big screen, can you highlight with the mouse where Brian was just talking about?
Yeah, actually, so where this jog comes over, so there's a walkway here, and
Yep.
it kind of comes down and comes across, and I think it ends here. So his issue was thinking that we'd have to put some kind of barricade here, but we weren't asking for a barricade, or I mentioned in the conditions curb or bollard or some other way. We're open to whatever that looks like, so it's not aesthetically
Yeah, well, and it
bad.
It would be a bit of overkill because the way the sidewalk, it actually comes down and it swings down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's not right in front there. It actually swings down here. So there's not really a necessary thing for any type of and because as is where they're parked right here, it's kind of like a gravel pad.
Mm-hmm.
But my main thing is, like I said, I'm in favor of seeing these guys do something good here, but I just don't want it to I just don't want to change what I have going on.
Yeah, we just didn't want anybody parking on the walkway, so somebody came down and they're trying to walk through and they got to kind of cut through the grass or whatever because of parking. So it looked like the way the parking is now that nobody's doing that, but we just wanted to make sure.
And I know there's concerns, people are talking about what's going to go on here, and I know there's the requirements they need to meet. But the reality of it is on these streets, because I know these very well, because I also own a whole bunch over one street over on Bourbon, most of that corner, is my tenants here, they never have an issue parking out here. They never had a problem with Fred and them. And the reality of it is, when you come around here on Bourbon, you have the corner building, and then there's an empty lot that the Hirsch's own. And quite frankly, that whole block is always open for parking. You know what I mean? So that's the reality of it. I know there's always concern around town about parking, but there's plenty of parking as far as that goes. Like I said, for me, I just want to keep the status quo with what I got. Just a concern on the barricade.
Mr. Banks,
Any
if it
questions?
was up to you, would you want to have that curb between your property and this property?
No, I mean, based on what I'm saying, I like what the situation we have. Like what the way things are. We've never had an issue with their tenant upstairs has always parked here. My tenants have always been, it's always been a great situation.
So your preference would be to not have a curb
Yeah,
right there?
absolutely, without a doubt. My preference is to kind of keep going with what's there. You know, and certainly I know you had said, hey, the lease with the garage is a commercial thing. I'll work with these guys to what that needs to be. We don't know what those terms are going to necessarily be, but you know, I'm certainly going to work with those guys. I want to see something good here, just like everybody in the community.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Other questions? Okay, thanks. Okay. Got to change my glasses again.
I didn't take the oath.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Do you hereby solemnly declare and affirm, under penalties of perjury, that your responses given and statement made will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and address.
Adrian Barclay. I live at 351 Urban. That's me right
Okay.
there in that house. Maybe I missed something here, but I'm looking at the two cars that, this is where this parking is, right behind.
Tim, can you just highlight so we
You
can,
was up. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Those two parking spaces, along with the others, I have observed cars coming out of the garage there, because my back is, I face it, so I'm seeing what's going on for the last few years. I'm not sure a car can back out of that. Have you actually tested this, that a car can back out with a car parked parallel right there? Has anybody tested that?
We haven't.
I can't get my hearse out of there with a car there, but I can get a Suburban.
You can't, with a car parked, because I've never seen a car parked.
Please
At my
speak.
privacy
Speak
fence.
into the microphone because this is being
Oh, I'm
recorded
sorry.
for record.
Please stay
Yeah.
talking towards the
Yeah. Got it.
I've never seen a car, coming out of the garage, but I've never seen this parking arrangement. There's not enough room. It just doesn't seem like it's possible.
Okay.
And my other concern, of course, is that how far from my privacy fence is that, are those cars going to be parked? In and out there. Did you say there was going to be some space?
There's a space of grass already between.
I know.
Yeah, between your
And
fence.
there's a little berm.
Yeah, there's a little berm, and then we're requesting some sort of curb or something at the end of that grass area.
Okay, so there would be a little less room for them because they would back up a little bit. And,
When I went out there and looked and I drew these blocks, I had envisioned that there would be something at the edge of that grass. So that would
Yeah.
this drawing already takes
they
that into
wouldn't be
consideration.
coming over that grass, then, is what you're saying. They
They-
wouldn't be as close.
Right.
It's
You'd-
like a foot,
yeah, you'd have that grass
foot there.
that grass space. Mm-hmm.
the grass stays.
That would be the plan. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but you think that cars can come in and out of the garage when there's a car parked there?
I didn't test it honestly. I can't answer to
Shouldn't
that.
that be tested because
Well,
there's...
if you, just so you know, there is a designated parking space size, and that has to be met. And if we determine that we want to approve this with recommendations, and we recommend X amount of spaces, that will have to be met by the square footage of lengths
Okay.
and widths for the project to proceed.
Right, it would have to be deemed safe, obviously, not to be risky coming out of the garage.
Correct, yeah, and I don't know, well, I don't think we can, the only thing that we can do is really specify number of parking spaces and size of those spaces, okay? The rest of that would be, I don't know if there is space required outside.
There's a
of
drive
that.
aisle requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
All right.
yeah, one of the conditions would be that the Public Works and Planning Department would have to do the final approval once this is all drawn
Right.
out.
Okay,
Okay, another, just a quick follow-up.
yeah, sure.
Well, that's my car there, I see that. I don't have a garage and I don't have a driveway. I'm concerned about an overflow from there. If they can't fit in there, they're going to come around to the front and use my space, which is not really technically, it's street parking, but I have nowhere else to park. And there's a few people on our street that have a similar situation. So I think that's where our petition and our concern is.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate you coming and speaking.
Thank you.
Is that it? Yes. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, please. Have you been sworn in? No. Great. Raise your right hand, please. Do you hereby solemnly declare and affirm under penalties of perjury that the responses given and statements made will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name and
Kathleen
address.
Lee, 314 Bourbon Street. I'm the vice chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. One of the first things I heard when he was going through his list of things, if it would be bothering the neighborhood or, you know, any the historic stuff, is, of course, this is the historic property of R. Madison Mitchell. He created his funeral business in the 1920s, over 100 years ago, and it was in this location, so it is a historic site. And I'm glad that they're not going to change the footprint of the building. However, I do take exception with the parking, and I do agree with Adrian and everybody else here that I don't think there's enough parking spaces. I do think that when these people have company, they're going to be parking on the streets. Also, these two parking spaces right here are directly behind Adrian's house. Now, if they park right up against the curb, how on earth are they ever going to get out of their cars if they're on the driver's side? Are they going to scoot over to the other side and get out? I don't think so. They're going to want to get out their side. And if they're carrying groceries or anything, they're going to park more towards the middle. The way the garage is settled now, and it was built that way by R. Madison Mitchell because he owned the lot next door that is now the bank's property. He built that back there, and then he had his workshop back there. And the way it is, I don't think that they can pull their cars out when there's cars parked there, unless they're parked right up against that curb, in which case the drivers cannot get out of their cars. And basically that's it. I just don't think there's enough parking there, and I'm also concerned about what's going to happen when they have company. They have, you know, friends over or whatever. Where are they going to park? We don't have enough parking spaces as it is right now. Between the Battery, not the Battery Island, the brewery that opened up at the Market Street, thank you, and the upcoming Harmerstown Art Center, we right now have a problem with parking in our block. And just because somebody drove by before this meeting started and saw that there was no parking on South Washington Street, they probably were all parked here for this hearing. So we're not an objection to having 5 apartments. We're just thinking that there's not going to be enough parking spaces for 5 apartments, and that they won't be able to get out of their cars. And what's going to happen is that they will park on the street because they won't be able to get out of their cars.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question for Ms. Lee.
Sure.
Ms. Lee, do you know if this property is on the Register of National Historic Landmarks?
It is actually on the Maryland Register of Historic Places.
Okay, thank you.
It is eligible to be on the National Register.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Please come forward.
Change your glasses again.
I will. I should know it by now. Raise your right hand, please. Do you hereby solemnly declare and affirm, under penalties of perjury, that your responses given as statement made will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please give us your name and address.
Jeanette Pollock, 218 South Washington Street, Havre de Grace. My comment is going to be more forward-thinking. We all understand, especially those of us who live and invest our time and our dollars in the historic district and attempt to keep up that flair and flavor of the historic district. I have on occasion mentioned the possibility to be considered of residential permit parking, meaning those people who have residences there have X number per square footage of lot or some theorem that will be developed. I would request a provisional be placed for this unit, should they be approved, that if at such time those residential permits were to happen, that the residences of that building would not be availed of them necessarily, since they would be having the dedicated parking in the rear of the property. Again, it is forward-thinking, but I think it is in everyone's best interest to do so, understanding that growth is not stopping, that Harborstown will be a wonderful addition to the community, however, creating a need for parking, and to factor these things in at the outset would be beneficial to the prospective owner of the property, as well as to those of us who live and work and invest in the community. And that is my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? At this time, the board will take a recess, and we will discuss this and come up with a motion.
Mr. Chair, if I could before that, could I request a brief recess just to see about, review the condition that was added on by the department with my client and potentially to recall him in regard to those proposed
Absolutely.
conditions?
Sure.
Thank you. could call Mr. Fred Zellman briefly, please.
Certainly.
And just for clarification, Mr. Zellman made a comment during one of the witnesses that I think was audible to everyone, but perhaps not for the record. So I just wanted to ask him so that it is clearly on the record after Mr. Zellman is sworn.
Okay.
Read it one more time.
Please raise your right hand. Do you hereby solemnly declare and affirm under penalty of perjury that your responses given to statement made will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
That's correct.
Please state your name and address.
Brett Zellman, commercial address is 123 South Washington Street.
And Mr. Zellman, you heard all of the testimony that was given today, is that correct?
That's correct.
You agree with the testimony of Mr. Niceforo?
Yes, sir.
And there was also a question that was asked about being able to turn from the garage onto the driveway and then access Strawberry Lane. You remember that question?
Correct.
What was your opinion of that?
In the past, I have been able to get a car out of the garage with people parked in the aforementioned spaces.
And I believe you said that that car was a Suburban,
Yes.
which is a larger vehicle.
Yes.
So you believe that the plan as indicated would be successful?
Yes.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? No? Thank you. All right.
If I may make a proffer in regard to the conditions, my client has no objection to the third and fourth proposed conditions, obviously, that they comply with parking, paving the parking spots, as well as with the dimensions and everything having to be approved with the site plan, as would be necessary anyway. There was testimony from Mr. Bangs that he would prefer not to have a curb on the northern boundary. My client has no objection to putting a curb on the southern boundary. I'm not sure. I believe the department may not be requesting that northern boundary based on that.
If the two adjacent property owners are fine with no curb, we're not going to require that unless it's an ADA issue or something like that, but it's fine.
So consent as to the southern boundary having a curb and having a condition to that effect. There is some wordsmithing that I believe that the department and I may have to do, so I'd ask for the opportunity to draft that language and submit it as a condition. The idea of putting the curb there is fine. There's just a logistics. What's written currently is that no building permit would be issued until the curb is installed. I don't know that it's logistically possible to build that curb without having the building permit, and so we just need to figure out the language for a cart and horse issue there, which I believe we won't have any problem doing. I just want to make sure we have it written appropriately.
We can just change that now if you're okay with it to use and occupancy.
That would be acceptable.
Okay, that's
Yes,
fine.
that would certainly take care of that issue. As to the first two spots in regard to the lease and having 8 spots, there's no problem conceptually with that, but again, it's a wordsmithing concern. As it's currently worded, there can be some confusion as to exactly how many spaces are required. We would request, first we would state that we believe the department was correct in their initial determination in the staff report that only the 2 spots are required, and so we would ask you to make that finding. However, if that is not your finding, we would ask that the condition read something that we would propose to you, but would essentially be that there be 8 spots provided between the extended garage lease and the spots on site, so that there's not any confusion that it's supposed to be 8 spots on site plus 2 additional spots or anything else. So there's a little bit of verbiage there that I'd like the opportunity to work with the department to correct if you believe that's appropriate. Obviously, again, our position is that 2 spots is what the code should really require.
Okay, thank you. All right. Do we have a motion? Discussion? Additional discussion?
Go with the original.
I'm sorry?
Go with the original Sam proposed. Accept the staff report like that.
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out how to word with the
take your
with the
time.
conditional approval, the final, if we come back. So I would like to make a motion to approve the conditional use of the multifamily dwelling at 123, 127. Furthermore, approve the 2 variance requests with the conditions that are specified in the staff report and presented here tonight. The only change to the one verbiage between your client and the department to work out is the 2 parking spaces per new unit, I think is better verbiage. It's in alignment with the code to include on-site and in the leased garage.
Thank you. That would be acceptable verbiage.
Second.
Second. All in favor of accepting the motion? Aye. Thank you all for coming. The motion's been approved, and good luck to all.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your time and consideration.
My wife cuts them up and makes notepads out of them. All this extra paper.
That's rough.
There was too much stuff packed, all the little changes.
I know,
Yeah.
I think you did good. Good job, Sam.
How am I gonna make a motion?
Good job. All right.
Yeah, of course, man, no problem.
Yeah.
He is good. Well, I haven't.
Now the room's gonna clear out for the second
I know.
case.
I know. I feel bad for these people. Folks, before we get started, apologize for having you to wait this long. It's probably my fault. I talked too long. But anyway, we'll get right on your case. The time is, what is the time? 7:45. It is August the 3rd, 2023. The purpose of our hearing tonight is to hear a request at 556 Lewis Street, a request to expand the existing funeral home that is a grandfathered use, but the expansion is still considered a non-conforming use in the RO zoning district. They will also have a variance for parking. At this time, anyone wishing to speak at the meeting, please stand for the oath. Thank you. Raise your right hand. Do you hereby solemnly declare and affirm, under the penalties of perjury, that the responses given and statements made will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you. Please be seated. The codified zoning ordinances of the Mayor and City Council of Havre de Grace specifies procedures governing the operation of the Board of Appeals of the city. Section 3 dictates administrative requirements to be met prior to the hearing. This includes advertising, posting of the property, and notification of applicable property owners. Have these requirements been met?
They have.
Have you heard any responses from interested parties?
We did have one letter, I believe, for this one from a resident. I do have that.
Could you read the letter for us, please?
Sure. It says, my name is Sherry Ramsey, the new owner and resident of 560 Lewis Street, the house next to the property in question. I'd like to express my concerns in allowing the funeral home to convert the house located at 556 Lewis Street into office space. The property in question is zoned as residential and was purchased by the funeral home in 2012 and was not as a part of the original funeral home, which has a grandfathered use. Converting the property into an office space would impact the residential area of the streets in several ways. First, as a new resident homeowner, it was my impression that I was moving into a street that was mostly residential in nature. I understand that further down the street there are commercial facilities. However, I was surrounded by residential properties. If the property in question is allowed to be converted into office space, that residential atmosphere would be compromised. The particular section of the street has seen an increase in improvements of houses, which has created a more neighborhood feeling, which is enticing to families. Converting the property would compromise that feel and potentially decrease the interest of future families purchasing homes on the street. Second, the additional vehicles and foot traffic from several unknown people utilizing the property as an office space creates safety concerns. As someone who has young children, safety is my first priority. As there's only street parking, patrons would be parking up and down the street, which would then increase foot traffic on an already narrow sidewalk, as there is only one sidewalk on the road. Additionally, the increased presence of several unknown parties would also increase the potential harm to the safety of both the families themselves and their property. No family wants several unknown people coming and going all day long while their children are playing in the backyard or on the front porch, which sits inches away from the sidewalk. Thirdly, traffic would also be impacted in an already narrow one-way street by the increase in vehicles of the new office workers and their patrons. Parking is already very limited on the street, as the property in question does not have a driveway, nor does mine or the neighbors across the street. Creating additional office space creates added traffic. An increase in speeding incidents would limit parking even further. I'm requesting that the conversion of the residential home be converted into office space be denied. However, if you do not allow the conversion of the property into office space, if you do allow the conversion of property into office space, I would ask that you kindly and respectfully, 1, keep the property as residential office to be in line with the rest of the houses on the street. 2, establish residential parking only signs in front of homes that do not have a driveway. 3, place speed humps on portion of the street that does not have homes to ensure people do not speed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The ordinances governing the operation of the Board of Appeals for the city is a matter of public records and is available at City Hall should anyone wish to review it. The applicant tonight, again, is requesting a variance for parking, and again, the expansion of their existing grandfathered business. First, we'll take testimony. First will be from the Department of Planning.
Thank you, Tim Borsier, Director of Planning. So the funeral home's expanding. It's not an allowed use in the district, as everybody knows. I'm not sure everybody knows, but in 1982, zoning was put in place in the city. Uses have been taken in and out of the zoning ordinance over time. If a use exists prior to the zoning or when that use was taken out, it's considered a non-conforming use, but it's able to stay. And then further under our code, it allows for the expansion of non-conforming uses. If it's under 25%, the department can approve of it if it doesn't need to go to Planning Commission. If it's over 25%, then it comes to all of you. So there's really nothing in city code that says why you should or shouldn't approve it. But what we do is we use the findings under Chapter 2517B. It's the same thing we do for special exceptions and conditional uses. We think those are 10 good criteria to see if it will have an effect on the neighborhood. So using those 10 findings, we examined the applicant's proposed expansion. It complies with all the procedural requirements. There is an existing house that was purchased. That existing house and the funeral home are adjacent to each other. There's 3 lots. Let me see if I can. There we go. So you can see on the screen here, you have 3 existing lots. You have the existing funeral home. You have the house that's been vacant for some time, and then you have this kind of empty lot. So these 3 areas will be consolidated into one lot. In the hollow green space is the house, and then where you see this small green square, that's more or less where the expansion will take place for the funeral home. Each of the separate uses are allowed in the district. So the applicant's expanding her chapel by 4 seats. A chapel is allowed. They're adding a storage room and a multi-purpose area. That's something that would also be allowed. And it's residential office, so a house being used as office space is exactly what the code had intended for this area. But technically it is an expansion of the funeral home as a whole, so that's why it's in front of all of you. So it complies with standards and requirements. We did not believe that it would be detrimental to the use and peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. It's a funeral. It will continue to be a funeral. They'll be providing additional services for their clients. But in our discussions with the applicant, there was the understanding that there wouldn't be any more hiring or larger, much larger funerals or anything like that than already take place existing. She can provide testimony to that when she comes up. It's in harmony with the general character of the neighborhood. The existing house will stay, the existing funeral home will stay, and there'll be an expansion that will be in the general character of what already exists. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan under the economic development element of the comprehensive plan. There's discussion about retaining and allowing for retention and expanding existing businesses in town. It won't adversely affect the health, safety, and security, morals, or general welfare of the residents, visitors, or workers in the area. It's already served by public water and sewer. They will be keeping everything that's there, so it'll maintain the preservation of cultural and historical landmarks. And there's a demonstrated need. Obviously, Ms. Scott is a professional in the funeral business, and if she recognizes that she needs some expansion for her business, then I think it's obviously it would be a necessary use. So that's for the non-conforming part. Again, there's no criteria in the code that gives us any guidance on why any of you should approve of this. Again, we look at special exception requirements because they tend to be pretty comprehensive, and it's our recommendation that you would approve of that expansion of the non-conforming use. So similar to the last one, our requirements to consolidate the lot, including the new uses, will require more parking spaces. So the applicant will require 18 spaces altogether. They have a garage that has 4 spaces. They have 3 parking areas in front of the garage that they use currently. And then we would be asking that they provide some sort of driveway for parking here next to the house that could easily get them to 10, so they'd be short 8 spaces. So the applicant, she can speak to this more, but we have a letter from the Colored School Museum that is allowing them to use these 8 spaces that are directly adjacent to the applicant's property. She also, and we didn't include it in this, but she also had a similar letter from Mount Zion Church to use these parking spaces here. Mount Zion, they've moved to Aberdeen, so I'm not sure how the building's being used, but both Mount Zion and the Colored School Museum have very limited hours at certain times of the week, and their parking can easily be utilized. So the applicant has 18 spaces, but they don't have all 18 spaces on their lot. So we don't have anything in our code that speaks to shared parking agreements. But just based on the location of this lot being with hers, there's the opportunity to create some path between her lot and their lot, it seems. So just with the proximity of the lots and the comprehensive plan and the city wanting existing businesses to stay and expand and retain those businesses, we would ask as part of this variance request that it's a technical request, but we're asking that you accept this parking agreement. But we could add into the conditions that if at any time this parking agreement changes, that we would require a new parking agreement or parking be provided somewhere else. Again, this is already an existing funeral home. It's not like the last situation where it's moving to a brand new use. You know, you couldn't cease the operations of people living inside a place once they were there. But in this case, you know, we could potentially limit some of the uses that were going on, but this is already something that's occurring. So on the last page, we recommend approval of the non-conforming expansion of the non-conforming use, and also approval of the variance request. We're requiring the 3 lots to be consolidated. There are a couple small property maintenance issues with the fence, so we just want the applicant's property to come in compliance with our International Property Maintenance Code and fix the fence, and a couple other things we can discuss with her. Would restrict the use of the 2-story home just to administrative and office features and those things that are allowed in the RO district, which the applicant has already stated to us that she would meet those requirements. construct a driveway where physically possible on the, with the expansion plans on parcel 1540, so that's next to the house here. Just reading through these really quick. Since it is a historic property, we're just asking that they provide the plans once the elevations are done and the look is done to the Historic Preservation Commission to provide comment. We're starting to ask them to provide guidance on historic issues. So we would just ask that those be provided for a review from the Historic Preservation Commission. That you accept the shared parking agreement. We would need something more in a lease or agreement form. So far, they've pledged on a couple different times a letter saying that they could actually use the entire parking lot, and then we said that they would only need to use 8 spaces. We would just want some specific lease or contract language once that's approved. Provide a safe path with a gate for pedestrians to move between Alliance Street and the funeral home property. So it's where this red line is on the screen. Submit detailed plans with the locations of landscaping, fencing, and other improvements that they plan to have, which is normal. Note this is kind of a one-time thing, so we're saying no future non-conforming uses or structures can be expanded or authorized. The applicant will obtain all applicable permits, and if there's any additional fees that are required, that they'll have to pay those prior to use and occupancy. That's it from staff. If you have any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Who would like to speak? Please state your name and address.
My name is Lisa Scott Coleman. Address is 552-556 Lewis Street, owner of the current business. I'm looking to do this expansion to increase. Unfortunately, the pandemic taught us a lot of things, and when churches were shut down, our facility is very small, so servicing the community became a challenge. So we're looking into trying to provide more space. I pray we never get into another pandemic again, but if we do, I'm looking ahead to try to have the space in order to allow families to say their goodbye a little bit more comfortably. As for the community, there would be no more disruption in the community than there has been in the past 20-some years that I've been there. The entryway to the funeral home will not change, even though we're going to utilize the home as an office. We still will allow the entryway to come in the way it always has and then venture over to the home. We're not looking to infringe upon our neighbors any more than we already have. With the parking when we have services, and we do our best to be considerate of our residents when we do have services. So I would just ask that you would consider this to allow us to grow and to service the community a little better, and pray we never have another pandemic. Thank you.
Any questions?
Are you aware of all the conditions that in the staff report? You find them all acceptable?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Fine. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Board will take a brief recess, and we will come back with our decision. In order. Do we have a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the modification of the existing non-conforming use of the funeral establishment and the approval of the variance requests with the following conditions in the staff report that are already noted on the record, items 1 through 11.
Great. Do we have a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Your motion's been approved. Congratulations. Hearing's now over. Got there.